Hi, my name is Vanessa Ryuta. I am an eighth grade civics and government teacher in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Um, and I had the opportunity of meeting your teacher this past weekend because I am also a tour guide in Salem, Massachusetts. Your teacher and I had a great conversation after the tour about some of the information we discussed. And I was able to share with him that my undergrad or my bachelor's degree in college is in history with an emphasis in the witch hysteria of Tudor and Stuart England. And I spent years teaching eighth graders in Florida about colonization and US history and doing lessons on the Salem witch trials. So he asked me to record a short video kind of explaining some of the connections between Great Britain and the colonies and why this witch hysteria traveled from, Europe over to North America. So in the 1400s, Europe was dealing with, or Western Europe, I should say, was dealing with a lot of religious fear and a lot of confusion. There was this idea that the devil was a human man walking the earth. And one of the big places this confusion came from was towards the end of the 1400s. You see men like Martin Luther. And then in the 1500s, you've got John Calvin, Henry VIII, John Calvin, all of these men. And you start to see a shift of Western Europe going away from the Catholic Church. This separation from Catholicism to Protestantism was looked at as the devil pushing the Christians away from the one true religion of Catholicism. That in order to truly be a follower of Christ and not um, a victim of falsehood, you had to be Catholic. It was declared Catholicism was the only way to be Christian, since the 300s AD or CE, depending on what you study. So this whole push away from Catholicism was seen as like the devil is in the details. And so you have the devil trying to recruit people for this, demonic or evil army by having these Europeans sign their name in blood in the devil's book. And so when the devil has successfully, Protestantized an area, the followers of the devil, those witches, stay behind and make sure that it continues pushing them away. You have Henry VIII denouncing the Pope and getting divorced and then getting remarried and then doing it all over again. You see his daughter in the mid 1500s, Mary, beheading all the Protestants and being so aggressively Catholic that people became very frightened of her. And so we focused specifically in the tour on England and Scotland because England was the first country to successfully colonize the eastern coast of North America. So in the early 1600s, when Queen Elizabeth died, there was a lot of debate and argument as to who was going to take the throne of England. She had no children and she was not married. So what they did is they had to find distant relatives. And this is where James VI of Scotland comes in. James VI of Scotland was known as a mad king, not mad like I'm angry, mad like I'm crazy. He believed that covens of witches were out to constantly assassinate him. He was very, what's the word? He was very aware of the long history and traditions of paganism in Scotland and saw that as a threat to religious beliefs in Christianity and saw himself as, the voice of God or the word of God, which many monarchs, kings and queens did at this time. That's what they believed. So anytime he believed a coven was trying to assassinate him, he would locate where he thought they were, which group he thought they were, and have them publicly executed. So when Elizabeth dies, James VI, who is a Stuart, but a cousin to the Tudors, actually comes down to replace Elizabeth on the throne and becomes James I, or not replace, she's she's not alive, becomes James I of England. This is the first successful colony of Jamestown. This is where you start to see, different translations of the King James Bible. During this time, you have this group of people called Puritans, and their goal is to purify the English church, or the Church of England, I should say. They saw the Church of England as very corrupt, especially under James. When James becomes king, things become much more aggressive. Europe is now over 200 years of witch hysteria and this fear, this confusion, this misunderstanding of what Catholicism was in everyday life. So it was a challenge. It was a big struggle for them to have to try to cope with what they saw as corruption in England versus have their own simple life. So they ended up going to King Charles in 1626 after James died. And they said to Charles, hey, we want you to send us to this new colony, this Massachusetts Bay colony. The Pilgrims made it. Jamestown is sustainable and successful. We want you to send us there so we can have this purification of the Church of England, this Mecca, this city on a hill, this biblical parallel city that we can live this pious and pure and fundamentally and ultimately Christian life. And so, of course, Charles I, more money, more land for England, of course. So he sends them over, and the Puritans struggle for a good 45 years. But they constantly, again, because they believe the devil is a human man walking the earth, they constantly believe that the devil is, creeping around or just behind them on their shoulders. And they're always trying to push the devil out and making sure that they're doing things to keep the devil away. But ultimately, the girls that start the afflictions and the accusations with the Salem witch trials, ultimately, the devil doesn't stay very far away, according to them. And with the introduction of the practices that Tituba teaches the girls in 1691, the accusations and hysteria begins in Salem in 1692, over 200 years after they started in Europe. And you kind of see how these philosophies and these mindsets that start in one area are transcontinental. They cross quite often, and beliefs are carried by, at that time, clearly not social media, but word of mouth and life and choices. And this is a little bit of a description regarding kind of how that hysteria traveled and how quickly things can go from peaceful and calm to absolute chaos and hysteria. So I hope that was able to teach you a little bit and that you enjoyed learning about it, and have a great day. Bye.